ISO FileMaker Magazine, the professional's resource for FileMaker know-how. Well, hello there, my fellow FileMaker enthusiasts and developers. This is Matt Petrowski bringing you these FileMaker tutorials from my website, FileMakerMagazine.com. If you're watching this on YouTube and you are so inclined, if you like what you find in this video, the information, then give me a thumbs up or subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you're interested in more in-depth videos like this one, you can always go to my website. So in this video, we're taking a look at the topic of using FileMaker 16's new functionality for uploading a file, and we're doing that to Dropbox. So let's take a look at the file and see what I'm talking about. Alright, so here we go. And first off, a little bit of a warning. This content is pretty in-depth when it comes to actually using this FileMaker 16 new feature. Also, this file will only work with FileMaker 16. As I bring up the file options, we're going to see right here that the minimum version required to open this file is 16. So if you don't have a copy of FileMaker 16, then this file will not open for you when you get hold of it. Now, I'll put the file up on the resources area of the FileMaker Magazine website. That's where you'll be able to download this file. Other than that, let's take a look at what it does. Quite clearly, I have an upload button right here with a nice little Dropbox icon. This is a container field where I have stored my file. Now, of course, I expect to be able to put things into a FileMaker container field. Maybe I'm capturing images, signatures, pictures of things when I'm on a job site or maybe in a medical application. No matter what it is, maybe I want to save these files to my Dropbox. Now over here is my Dropbox folder right here, and you'll notice that as I click upload, we'll get a little bit of a prompt, uploading file, a little bit of a pause. Just wait for it for one little second while the Dropbox synchronizes, and there it goes. We just got our folder with that file of testing.txt. So of course, if this is a Dropbox folder that is shared, you can now, this is available to anybody who has access to that folder. Now, the key thing to understand in the rest of this video as we go through some pretty dense documentation is that learning how to work with an API, that is any other third-party service, and working with their application programming interface, that's what API is short for, that's going to require you to spend some time looking at the documentation. So the rest of this video, it is about using that documentation in order to achieve this one specific task, and that is uploading. But there is many, many more things that you need to do to know about if you're going to fully implement an API into a FileMaker file. For example, I wouldn't necessarily just want to upload the file. I might want to check to see if files are existing or whether the folder's there, or do all kinds of other maintenance related things. But this file, it'll get you going very quickly. Let's take a look. All right, now as I mentioned, being a good developer is all about being able to use and reference documentation, and that's absolutely what you're going to have to do when you're going to work with an API. Now in this case, I'm working with an API that is the Dropbox API, meaning Dropbox provides a set of information and instructions that allows us to perform this operation, uploading a file from our container in FileMaker up to Dropbox. Now in this file, as I open up the scripting workspace, what you're going to see is there's pretty much two scripts. The first script that we're going to look at, which is super simple, is API docs. And you can see right here, all it is an open URL. And when I open that, it will take you to the documentation that Dropbox provided with regards to how you connect to their service. We're going to take a look at that in this video. Now, the main script is this one right here, upload Dropbox. And then I am able to specify a file path. Now, before we take a look at that script, we need to look at the documentation so that you have a good sense of what you need to do whenever you're going to implement any third-party API. All right, so now let's head down the path of the documentation dig. This is where you have to dig into the documentation and find all of the little specific pieces to the puzzle that help you get to your destination, which is ultimately uploading the file. Now, first I want to say that when you're going to upload or interact with any third-party service, in this case, Dropbox, you have to authenticate. And that basically means you have to say that you are who you say you are, and the service has to verify that via some type of method. Typically, it's an account, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your specific controlled account. It can be through what's known as a token, using a method called Oauth. And this is where a third-party application can use a third-party service, and you just simply provide it with your credentials. It authenticates you, and then it gives the service, I should say, gives the person a token in order to interact with that service. We are not doing that in this video. We are directly interacting with our own account, so we're going to use a persistent token in order to have our FileMaker database interact with that system. So the first place we need to go is to insert from URL. You can see that right here, and that's the one script step that makes everything work in terms of interacting with any third-party service. However, the implementation of insert from URL changed significantly in FileMaker 16. In particular, two primary features. One, they gave us the ability to return the results of insert from URL into a global variable, meaning we don't actually have to have a field in the database anymore. Hooray, that's a good one. The second one is they exposed all of the underlying functionality of curl, which is a very predominant library used in a lot of software. And down here at the bottom, you can see we have this link, supported curl options. So if you are afraid of a lot of different settings and learning a lot of the different things that settings do, this may not be for you, but hopefully through the course of this video, you'll be able to say, you know what, it's not that bad. I can actually learn this. So basically the way that curl is implemented is there's these items called flags. Some people call them switches, and basically each of these modify the behavior of curl. Now curl is built into FileMaker, but if you were to use curl on the command line, you would see all of these different dash, whatever the switch or the flag is. The cool thing about any API is that the API itself will typically provide you with information about how to structure it using curl. So as I scroll through all of these options here on the FileMaker help page, fear not, I don't actually have to take the time to look at these options, because when I look at the Dropbox documentation, it provides them for me. So I'm going to switch tabs here, and this is the link that's in that first script in the file that you get hold of. You're able to open it, and it will open to this page. Now, if you're searching out on the internet and you search for Dropbox upload file, a lot of the times you'll get an older API version. In fact, down here at the bottom, you can see that Dropbox has an API.v1. Now, as services evolve, they of course change their different APIs, or their different ways that you can connect, or the methods, I should say. So API v1 is actually being phased out, or deprecated as they use the term in the programming world, and it's in favor of the API version 2, which is what this video is about. If you're watching this video and the API has changed yet again and it's maybe version 3 or version 4, follow along the information, but do it within the version of the API that you're going to use. Now here on the side, we can see that we've got documentation. And in most cases, you're not going to be choosing any of these other languages because those are not specific to us for FileMaker. But the one thing that is HTTP. So when we select this option, what we get is all of the different things that we can actually access. Now the overview comes up at the beginning or at the top, but what we're interested in when it comes to interacting with an API is the user endpoints. When we click this, we will get a listing on the side of all of the different possible ways that you can interact with this API. And you can see that as I scroll through them, there are a lot of them. And as I mentioned, we're only implementing one single thing in order to upload a file to this API. Now, as I scroll here and scroll up to the top, I think it's under Files. Let's see where I'm looking for Files. There it is. This is the one that I had to look for. Now, you don't have to go searching for these things. Here's a nice little trick if you don't already know it. Every browser actually has built into it a find command. So I'm just going to hit Command F, Control F if you're on Windows, and I type in the word upload. And guess what happens? Here within the browser, I get a highlighting of all of the different places where the word upload is listed. This is the quickest way to get to what you think might be used as a keyword for what you're trying to accomplish. So I click on Alpha Upload, and as I mentioned, here is all of our information right here for us. Remember, I said that most APIs will give you examples with all of your curl switches or flags. Well, here they are. So ultimately, all I did was simply select all of this, copy it, paste it into my FileMaker calculation dialog box, and then modify. Now, when I say modify, that's because this is actually formatted for the actual curl command line application. And what we'll see at the end of each line here is we see this trailing slash. So obviously this text is not in the format that will work within FileMaker. But of course, if you have this file and you've been watching this video, you have access to the file and you don't need to do this same thing by copying and pasting. But I need to give you the information so that you know how to do it yourself. Now, as we look at all of this information, we can see this one piece that's required right here, get access token. Now, this is a key piece of information that's required to work with any third-party service. You have to set up with that service in order to allow your FileMaker database to actually access the service. So that's what we're going to take a look at next, right before we take a look at the ultimate script that's going to connect us to Dropbox and allow us to upload the file. All right, so this is the next critical piece of the puzzle in order to work with any third-party service. Well, some of them may be open, but most services require authentication. Now, we can see on screen right here, what I've done is I've already created an application. Now, as far as an application, quote-unquote, is termed in terms of third-party services, basically it's just an ID that uniquely identifies your software as being something that's connecting to the service. So in this case, I have named a file or named an application, according to Dropbox, FileMaker_Pro. Now I know that you are not going to be able to create an application in your Dropbox and call it FileMaker Pro, FileMaker_Pro, because only one application can be named as such. So you'll probably need to rename or name this something else. We can see that the status is development and the permission type is full Dropbox. Now you can create a permission type to just a specific folder, and we're going to see that as we create the application. Now you have to be logged into your Dropbox account. You have to have a valid Dropbox account. And the way that you're going to access this is not after you log into Dropbox in general, but you're going to have to go to the developer-specific URL in order to create this application. Here's where you're going to see that. Dropbox.com/developers/apps. And once you've headed to that URL, that's where you're going to be able to click on this button of Create an App. So when I click Create an App, we have a couple of questions that were asked, and every service will probably go through some type of wizard process in order to do this. In other words, what type of API are we going to use? The standard Dropbox or the Dropbox Business? In this case, just the standard Dropbox will do. Next, what's the type of access? Do we want just a folder, or do we want full Dropbox access? Now, if you're going to be working with a lot of different aspects of your Dropbox via FileMaker, click on the full Dropbox. And finally, name your app. And as I zoom in here, you can see that I can try to call something FileMaker_Pro. And when I attempt to create the app, it will tell me that the name is already taken. So you're going to need to use something specific, probably to your application. Say, for example, my FileMaker Pro app, or whatever it ends up being in terms of how the FileMaker solution is being used. So when I create the app will be created for me as far as Dropbox is concerned. Now, there's a couple of key pieces of information that we need to be aware of. First off, we can see that right here we've got an app key and an app secret. And this used to be the way that a lot of third-party services, and some still do, actually connect. You provide the key, and then you also provide a secret, which there's the secret for this particular app. Now, I'm not concerned about revealing these here on this video because I will have deleted this app and they will no longer be valid. You can also see this section right here of Oauth 2. This is the important area that you're interested in if you're going to be connecting to the service, and you're going to be doing it on behalf of other users. Also, it's where you can generate what's known as a persistent token. That's a token that you embed into your FileMaker database that you never expose, that allows you to connect to the third-party service, in this case, Dropbox. So as I zoom out, you're going to see right here that there is a generated access token. Now, typically you use URLs in order to redirect somebody in order for them to type in their information and then grab a token. That's a lot more steps in the process, but it is something that you would do if you're going to use your FileMaker database as a third-party app in order to access this third-party service on behalf of another user. If you're going to be using this FileMaker database just for yourself, you simply need to click Generate an Access Token. And what you're going to get is a super long string like the one that we see on screen. Now, this is the super secret key that we need to embed into our FileMaker solution. It's the key that authenticates us when we connect to Dropbox each time that we do. This is the way that you're going to add this into your FileMaker solution. All right, back in our FileMaker database, this is an important part of the equation whenever you're going to embed something that's super secret in your FileMaker solution. There's a number of ways to do this, but my personal preference is to use a custom function. You can embed this, of course, directly into the script, but by using a custom function, we can not only hide it from any other users, unless they're a full access user, but we also have the ability to call it in one single place, that custom function. So by going up to File, Manage, and then choosing Custom Functions, you're going to see that I already have one there. In fact, it's my valid token that I have embedded. But also notice that what it has set here is full access accounts only. In other words, only full access accounts can ever see the results of this function directly by calling it. But the function itself can be used throughout the whole FileMaker solution. So you would click on New, you would type in the name of whatever it is, special token, because it's a persistent token. You would then put what you had copied, that full string, and then down at the bottom, you'll select the only accounts assigned full access privileges can actually return the result from this function. That's very important. And we click OK. So now, anywhere in any of our scripts or our calculations, we can reference this special token, which is simply returning that secret key that only our solution needs to know and nobody else should ever be able to have access to. Now, there's one other thing you need to be aware of before you proceed with this whole process. Notice that my status is development, and my development users say only you. In other words, I'm the only person that's going to be able to access this through this API. In order to make this a legitimate application that you deploy, you'll probably need to choose to apply for production. I'm not exactly sure if that's the case. You may be able to use this directly embedded and just use it persistently within a development state, but if it's going to be something you're going to release commercially, especially if you're going to be using it on behalf of other users, accessing their own Dropbox setup, that's when you're going to have to apply for production. And of course, you can enable additional users under development if you're going to just use this for a small little work group type situation. Okay, so now we're headed for the home stretch, the final piece to the puzzle, which is basically getting the file from FileMaker up to Dropbox. This is all handled by the one script that we initially took a look at, which is upload to Dropbox. Or I should say we initially saw that it's one of the two scripts that we have. Now, really, when it boils down to it, there's only a few steps that are actually going to make this happen. And if you recall, I said the key is insert from URL. This one step is what makes all the magic happen. But in order to understand what's going on, we need to walk through all of the different pieces of the puzzle of the script. First off, there's no point in actually uploading a file if we don't have one. So we're going to test for that by saying if it is not empty, that's the file field that we created in this file called upload Dropbox, there's no point in doing anything. So only if we have a file are we going to proceed. Next thing, we can see that I'm setting a global variable of message to a little bit of some status of what's going on. Uploading file ... And the next thing we do is we refresh the object. I have named the object text.message. Now, if you are unfamiliar with this setting, let me show you really quickly. We're going to go into layout mode. We have the merge field on the layout right here. It is basically just a text block. It is a merge field because of these values right here are greater than and less than double sets, and then we can put any variable on screen that we want. Also note that this particular object of text, when we take a look at the position tab in FileMaker, has been named the object text.message. That's how we actually reference the refresh in order to refresh that object. So there it is right there. Refresh object text.message. Now, because things can happen so quickly, I've put in a little bit of a pause, pausing for just 1 second, and then comes the rest of the magic. First off, we are going to capture all of our results into a global variable. And you can see that I've capitalized that. That indicates to me, according to my standards, that if it's global, it's all caps. So the result is set to nothing. And then the very next thing that we need is where in this copy of this Dropbox are we going to store things. That's where you provide a file path. The file path I am passing in as a parameter. We can see that because when we look at the name that I've named the script, I've said I expect a file path to come into this script of where this file is going to be stored. Now, of course, if you're confusing file path and the file name, don't confuse them. You can use both of these aspects within one value, file path. It can include the name of the file as well. Now, of course, we need the URL where we're going to upload things to. This is always the API URL provided to you within the documentation for the API. In this case, it's content.dropboxapi.com, the number 2, which represents the version of the API, files, and then alpha upload. Now, one thing to note in this video, I am shooting this as of the release of, well, not necessarily the release, but Dropbox has updated their API from V1 to V2. So you can see right here that this says preview may change or disappear without notice. So when Dropbox updates and finalizes this version 2 of the API, I would have to change the URL to a corresponding one that they actually supply for the API. But no big deal. I just change it in one place. Now, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is the file itself. In FileMaker, the great thing with the new implementation in FileMaker 16 and its ability to use the insert from URL to upload files is that the only way that you can do this is by uploading a file that itself has been read into a variable. So that's what's happening right here. We're setting the variable of file to the value of upload Dropbox, the contents of the container field. Now, don't be confused by this, because when you look at the data viewer within FileMaker Pro Advanced, file is simply just going to say the name of the file in text within the data viewer. But that's not what is stored in the actual variable. What's stored in the variable is the full contents of the file. Now, next, we have what Dropbox API expects as an argument within the settings that we're going to put within insert from URL. Now, both of these values, the argument and the curl settings, could easily be put directly within the insert from URL script step. However, I suggest that you don't do that because things within FileMaker are sort of hidden. The settings that you find in these specify areas of the actual script step, they're sort of obscured and you can't see or read what's going on. By putting them in individual steps above the insert from URL, we can actually read the script what's going to be going into the insert from URL script step. Just a nice tip. Now we need to head over to the documentation. Switching over to Safari, this is where you get all of the information of what's expected. We can see right here when we take a look at this example, curl, it's going to be a post. Here is the URL. I simply copied that and pasted it into the URL or the set variable step of the URL. The curl settings are all of these settings right here that I copied separately, which needs the integrated access token, which we have put into a custom function. Then we have the Dropbox API argument. So the way that Dropbox is expecting to get all of its instructions is in a JSON formatted set of all of the different things that tell Dropbox what you want to have happen when you do the upload. All of that information is right here that you can see. Now, if you have not worked with JSON before, it is simply a value pair structure of what JavaScript notates as objects versus arrays. It may look a little confusing initially when we take a look at how it's implemented in FileMaker, but quite simply, it is this. Anything that opens with the curly brace is known as an object. Anything that opens with a regular bracket is known as an array. And so you'll have to become familiar within JavaScript of the differences between these two. Basically, we're going to specify and add all of this information within FileMaker using FileMaker 16's new JSON functions in order to recreate this exact structure. Now, the way that I did that is I simply copied this and made FileMaker return a result until I got something exactly like this. And it's really pretty easy. Let's take a look. Over in FileMaker, when we look at the argument settings, those in this set variable, what we're going to see is that we're using the JSON set element function. Actually, let me go into the specify for you so we get our nice formatting. Now, here is where we need to become familiar with the JSON set element. JSON set element, very much like the substitute, actually takes multiple parameters. And the way that it does that is with these bracket values. Now, we're working with a lot of brackets and curly quotes here, so don't confuse the two. These brackets are the brackets required by FileMaker's function. These braces are the braces that are being passed into the function JSON set element. So let's follow along here. We're using JSON set element to create an object. That's that's the wrapping object which all of the values are going to be stored within. All of the values that are name value pairs are stored in this format. The name of it's the name of the value that you're going to store and then the value itself. So the path of where we're going to store in Dropbox is coming from the file path that we took as an inbound parameter. That's what we put on the parameter on the button itself, or anything that calls this particular script. Now, in the JSON functions in FileMaker, you have to tell FileMaker explicitly what type of JSON object is it, or element. Is it a string? Is it a Boolean? Is it an array? And all of this information can be found within the documentation. Again, a good developer knows and uses documentation. Going back to the curl documentation, or not the curl documentation, but the, where is it? What am I looking at here? The JSON set element. We would have to go in and actually look for JSON, search for that. JSON, let's see, set element. There it is right there. And then we'll scroll down. These values can be found right here, where you have JSON string, JSON number, JSON object, JSON array, Boolean, null, etc. Once you're familiar with those and you've familiarized yourself with a little bit of the JSON, you can simply replicate what we had. Now, if I copy all of this, right here, we can see the result of this by using the data viewer, which is really helpful in FileMaker. If you're using regular FileMaker and not FileMaker Pro Advanced, then try to get hold of FileMaker Pro Advanced, because the data viewer is where we can actually look at, I'll get rid of these, so I'll create a new one, the results of what we get. So here, by taking off these, which aren't absolutely necessary for uploading in this particular case, and adding my semicolon, we can see that I'm getting the exact same thing that we get when we look at the documentation on the Dropbox page. Although this is not very pretty, I'm going to select all of this, cut it, and put in the JSON format elements. And paste that value in. So now I get a pretty printing version of this where I can see that auto rename is true, mode is add, mute is false, path currently is nothing because file path is nothing. But if I was to change that here to some, actually it would have a slash, some folder file.txt, we would see that that's actually the result that we're going to get because we modified the values up here. Now again, all of these property groups and the fields that you apply to them, these are all here for the purpose of what you can do to the actual file when it's uploaded. In fact, you need to research the documentation. Mode add is modified by the auto rename. So if I was to say false, I don't want to auto rename, then you have to account for more different circumstances when you actually upload the file. If you let Dropbox actually rename the file by setting auto rename to true, when you upload a new version of a file, it will actually change the name to append a 1, then a 2, then a 3, making sure that you don't actually overwrite a file. Otherwise, if you do want to overwrite, that is an option that you can set. You simply need to read the API. Another thing to note here is the way that the JavaScript path, or JPath, I forget what it's called specifically, actually references objects. So the way that we've established the property groups is we initially set it. We said that it is a JSON array, but then in order to reference that array, everything in JSON is zero-based, or in JavaScript. So the very first element in the property group needs to be referenced by this bracket 0 bracket. This is the same notation that you find in FileMaker when you're working with repeating variables or repeating fields. And then finally, you just follow that up with a dot notation of what subsequent object you want to set a value into. So we can see right here that property groups creates my array of the fields. There's the first array. We've got an object that we've created. There's the fields right here. And then fields 0 is the zero-based array where we get the name of the security policy, and the value being confidential. Now again, I'm only showing you this so that you know how to actually modify this JSON structure down to the level that you need to. As far as this video is concerned, the only values that are required to get a file up onto Dropbox are these values right here. A very simple structure. All right, and we are so close to finishing this video out, but there's one more thing that you must be aware of when you're going to work with the curl settings within the insert from URL, and you're doing it via some type of API like the Dropbox API. We have to escape quotes. And what this means is that when things are passed as curl options, many times those quotes are required and must be escaped. We can see that when we take a look at the documentation itself on the Dropbox, and we actually zoom in here and see that the Dropbox API arg, when it's passed to curl with the header flag, actually has to escape these quotes of all of these JavaScript name value pairs. Now, in order to do that, we could use FileMaker's quote function, but it won't work quite right. So when we head back over to FileMaker and I show my data viewer, and I'll create a new variable and I'll paste in what I have, you can see that what I've done is I've had to use a substitute wrapped around the JSON set element in order to get all of the values to be in the properly quoted format. And that's because ultimately we're going to be putting this value into all of those different header flags for the curl options. And if you don't know how to quote these, then you're going to have a problem whenever you work with any third-party API. And quite simply, it's done by this. These quotes encapsulate this quote which is being escaped, meaning I want to take all double quotes and I want to convert them to an escaped version of a quote. So the double slashes are required in order to escape the slash quote. So this first slash means I want a literal slash, and this slash escapes and says I want a literal quote. So what happens is anywhere where there are quotes that are returned, they get replaced with a slash quote, which escapes them so that they can be used within the curl settings of the insert from URL step. Yes, that's a lot of work. It's a mouthful, but it's something that you have to do. And there may be other situations where you need to escape more than just the double quotes. For this particular example, we really only needed the double quotes. All right, now we're ready to move on. So we've got our arguments with all of the different settings, and now we need to set up our curl settings. So when we look at this final step to the puzzle, we can see what we're doing. We are including all of those headers that we had copied from the Dropbox documentation. What's our authorization? Well, it's our bearer, and it's our special token coming from our custom function that we have said that only full access accounts can actually see the results. Yet, this script can use the results of it when it's actually executing. We're going to concatenate to that the next header, which is everything that tells Dropbox what do you want to do in this particular situation. Well, it's all of those arguments. We're going to add the file. What do we do with the conflict resolution? Is auto rename turned on? Next, what is the content type that Dropbox is actually receiving? In this case, it's an application octet stream. If you need the keyword for this, this is known as a MIME type. So depending on the type of file that you're actually uploading, sometimes this will be different. And finally, what is the actual file that we're uploading via the data binary flag? Well, FileMaker uses this nice little convention that if it sees the prefix of an @ symbol, that means you're going to be able to transfer whatever is either in a single variable, a locally scoped variable, or a double $ global variable. It really doesn't matter, but you saw already in the script step that we read the file, the contents of the file from the container into this variable field. And that's exactly what's going to be transferred up to Dropbox to be saved. And finally, our insert from URL is what's doing the magic. And when we double click this, these are the options that you need to have set. Number one, we're going to not set the result into a field, although we could. We're going to set the result into a variable, a global variable called result. Now what happens is Dropbox is going to return some JSON text to us about what actually happened. In other words, different attributes of the file, the time that was changed, the name, the path, and all kinds of different pieces. And we'll see that as we walk through the script at the very end here. Now our options are where we're going to set things like this. Yes, we do want to verify SSL certificates. We don't ever want to transfer to a site that might pose as Dropbox, so we definitely want this checked. Select entire contents doesn't really apply because it's not actually a field and it doesn't apply to variables, but you can leave it checked. The target, that is the URL that we want to use. So as I click on specify, as I mentioned, actually, the URL is right here. Specify is the target of the URL for our result, right there. And for our specify URL, there's the URL variable that we're referencing. Again, this could be directly embedded, but it obscures it, not as easy to read. And finally, our curl options. And here, again, super easy. We're just specifying our variable that we established called curl settings. And long story short, or I should say long story long, this insert from URL will ultimately transfer the file up to Dropbox and save it. Now again, you have to read the documentation, but you can see right here, if we did not get an error, in other words, the insert from URL succeeded because we had an internet connection. Let's say, for example, a phone might not have an internet connection, then we would get an error and we would need to handle that and say, I'm sorry, you're not connected to the internet, or something to that effect. But in this case, if we don't get an error, meaning the file was transferred, then that's when we can take a look at the result that we got back from Dropbox and actually pull things out. And in this case, you can see that I'm using the JSON get element, the opposite of the JSON set element, and we're actually comparing against the file path. What this means is with the auto rename turned on, if we upload a different version of the file, then we can actually show a different message in the fact that the file was copied, or a copy of the file was made instead of actually being overwritten. Again, everything that deals with an API is completely up to you in terms of controlling what happens when you interact with that API. And finally, we refresh the object. So let's take a look at this really quickly. We'll go ahead and save that. Let's run through the debugger and we can watch what happens in our current. First, I'm going to set my result to blank. I'm going to set my message to blank. And we're going to watch the script as we transfer the file. I'm going to bring up my debugger, click upload, and watch what happens. So, first, is our file empty? It is not. Do we set a variable of the message to uploading file? And we refresh the object. That was refreshed. We pause for the 1 second. We clear the result because we want to get the result not of the previous transfer or any other transfers or results from any other scripts, but the result from this script. Set the file path. We're uploading to /FileMaker/testing.txt. That came in as the script parameter. You can see that right there. The URL, that's the URL that we were given on the API website. The file read into memory is this file right here. Just read into memory. Again, don't be confused by the fact that it's showing you the text of the name of the file. This variable is the contents or the whole of this file, the binary file. Arguments. There is all of our JavaScript right there, or JSON, excuse me, and that JSON has been escaped, ready to be used as part of the curl arguments. Curl settings, they are set right there. There is our token that came from our custom function. There is our Dropbox API with the merged in JSON right there. Finally, we have our content type, almost always required in a lot of different interactions with third party. And then our data binary is going to be coming from our variable. We insert from URL, and as a result, our result global variable has been set. Now here's a little tip that I'd like to give you. When you get results back from working with third-party services, it can be very difficult to read all of this content. Get a third-party tool that will format this for you. I'm going to bring up a application called Visual JSON, which I like to use, where I can just paste in this content, or select all of it, delete, and paste, and then take a look at it in a pretty printed format. It even has a tree where I can look at the dictionary, and it'll actually allow me to modify or grab each of the individual values. This makes it infinitely easier to work with JSON when you're working within FileMaker. And there are a ton of different tools out there. This is just one that I use for quickly formatting a result in order to see all of the different values that I can extract out. Now you can extract out any of these values using the JSON get element, which we've already taken a look at. And that's what you can use in order to determine how you want to notify the user of the results of the operation. And here you can see, if I say JSON get element, the result, if it equals the same file path, that means that the same file was uploaded. I say that the file was uploaded, and then I refresh the object. And that is how we can upload to Dropbox. Now, of course, if I have a modified version of the file, which I'm going to do right now, I will simply modify this version of the file. I'll open it. I'll insert some new text, like this is some other text. I'll save that file, and then I'll put it into my FileMaker field. Now, once I put it into my FileMaker field, the way that Dropbox knows when a file is different is it can tell, based on the contents of the file, whether or not it has been changed. So when I upload the file again with the file having been changed, what will happen is based on the settings of the auto rename, what I will get is the testing 1 version. You can see that based on the API and the settings that I have set in the API, it's not actually overriding this one, it's actually creating a new one. But again, you get to control that all based on the API. And you can see that my message also showed that the file existed, a copy was uploaded. A key thing to using any API is to remember it is fully up to you to control and do what the user would expect to see when the user does things within your FileMaker database. Of course, I could have given no message and just upload the file and overwrite anytime, every time, no matter what. It's completely up to me. So this has given you all of the information that you need in order to interact with third-party service and uploading a file to Dropbox. I've also given you all of the information that you need for investigating and working with any other API. All you have to do is find their documentation and then dissect all of the pieces to the puzzle, put them together, and you end up with the pretty picture that you're looking for at the end of your work. So as always, I'd like to wish you much luck with your own FileMaker development. Again, if you're interested in this type of video, if you're on YouTube, please click the subscribe button, or at the very least, give me a thumbs up. Help me out with the rankings out there. And if you're interested in more information about developing with FileMaker, check out my other videos at FileMakerMagazine.com. So until next time, happy FileMaking. We hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial, and we'd like to say thank you for your subscription and your support. If you're not already a subscriber, head on over to www.FileMakerMagazine.com/subscribe for more information about the benefits of joining.